So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Happy Ash Wednesday. I can't believe that it is already Ash Wednesday. Boy, this year has gone by fast. Baby's with us. In fact, if you want to see my ash tag of the baby for Ash Wednesday, she's been ashed. It's official. You know, it was done with a Q-tip, though. That was definitely a first. Apparently, my church was not one of those where they're sprinkling them on top of the head, the ashes. I'll actually explain to you whether or not sprinkling of the ashes on the head is kosher, the Catholic Church, where the roots of that may or may not be. We'll also be diving in basically the entire show today for Lenten Hacks, how to enhance your Lent, how to fast better, let go of things, embrace things, find what we need to detach and attach from. But I'm really excited because I think the most fitting person is joining us today, and that is Sister Tina Alfieri. And if you're not familiar with her, prior to becoming a hermited nun, she is actually a therapist, and she's a specialist in specifically addictive disorders and sexual addictions. And so we have a specialist in spiritual direction and addictive disorders who will be joining us today here on Trending to help us kick off our Lent. So if you have a question for something you're trying to kick this Lent, this is the person to ask, Sister Tina Alfieri. So you can give us a call at 1-888-914-9149, or you can head over to my Instagram story where I put up a question box and you can ask your question there. I know the questions have been flowing in over the last couple of days because you want to know how to live your best Lent this year. You know that show, maybe you grew up with it, maybe your kids or your grandkids did, called Blue's Clues? You know, we just got a letter. Wonder who it's from? Steve, we all miss Steve. Man, I mean, this is crazy because now Blue's Clues is no longer Blue's Clues. They are Pride Clues. You can guess, they're all for the rainbow now. They didn't rename their show, okay? They didn't rename their show, but in teaching kids the alphabet, they have an alphabet song. And listen to this.
M is so magical.
N's a nice neighbor nearby.
O is outstanding, one of a kind.
And P is full of pride.
Now get ready for an alphabetic ride. Every single letter is unique. And don't forget.
Okay, so we now know if you are a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and you watch Blue's Clues, you know that P is for pride, and they have the LGBTQ colors flashing with the rainbow, gay pride flags, you name it, they have that for kids. Now, you know, I could easily say, you know, it's a kid's show. Kids have no idea what pride is. They don't know what the rainbow is. They won't recognize the gay pride flag and be influenced by it. That's right. But here's the problem. State of California, along with other states, what do? They implement a radical pro-LGBTQ curriculum for kindergartners and up. And so what's happening is we are continuing to normalize same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria. And here's why it's a really big deal. I mentioned this yesterday and I've been mentioning it. There is a trend of young girls, teenagers, tweens as young as 12 and 13, and college-age students who are coming out in groups of their girlfriends as suddenly transgender, with no prior trans identity, with no prior gender dysphoria. And it's really confusing, but here's what's come out over the last week or so. What's happened is a journalist by the name of Abigail Schur, who was actually pro-transgender, ended up blowing kind of the whistle after talking to a Planned Parenthood employee this week. And a Planned Parenthood employee in the interview that came out showed how in her small area, after having worked for Planned Parenthood for a number of years, these girls are coming in regularly for cross-sex hormones, as well as boys, but it seems to be a major trend among girls. And the girls come in, and when they're waiting in the waiting room, they're giggling, they're happy. It's like they're going to get their ears pierced together or something. But she was one of the people who would take the intake for the girls who wanted the transgender cross-sex hormones, who wanted to take testosterone. And she said that these girls were on multiple kinds of medications: anxiety, depression, antipsychotic, and others. And it's really confusing as to why Planned Parenthood would allow this to occur within their facilities. They have no medical professional actually signing off on whether or not a kid or even a young adult receives cross-sex hormones. And so here's the deal. These girls are receiving testosterone dosages at the rate of 10 to 30 times higher than a girl's body would normally handle a testosterone quantity amount within her body. Now, 12 states have already voted to not be able to give these cross-sex hormones using taxpayer funding, but 38 states here in the United States use Medicaid taxpayer money in order to fund cross-sex hormones in these Planned Parenthood facilities. And again, it's a clinic manager who's signing off on this. And in the instance of this whistleblower from Planned Parenthood, she said the clinic manager, her prior experience prior to running or eventually, working her way up to being the manager of Planned Parenthood, is she was a manager of a Wendy's. She has no medical background. She has no right to sign off on whether or not a teenage girl is receiving high levels of cross-sex hormones. And so I bring this up in relation to the Blue's Clues conversation because Blue's Clues normalizing gay pride through using P for pride isn't just something of, oh, the kid's going to see it, no big deal. Because the exposure is intense and constant. Girls are being told that this is normal and this is just what you do with your friends, just like getting your ears pierced. If this is what makes you feel good, just like a teenage girl, she says she'll really feel better and happier and more confident if she gets those ears pierced and fits in with the other girls. She says she'll feel more comfortable if she has a cell phone and can text and have social media just like the other girls. It's all about fitting in for girls who otherwise don't feel like they can fit in. These are the same girls who they said actually, when the girls come into the facility and they're doing the intake, actually have self-harm marks on their bodies. And they don't address that. They don't talk about it. And I'm also wondering, what about mandated reporting? Where's the responsibility for Planned Parenthood facility workers who, like I am, they are mandated reporters because they work with youth? They should be reporting that. How do you know that that girl engaged in self-harm and someone else didn't harm her? Right? So why is it that they are not reporting these instances, yet alone giving them cross-sex hormones and testosterone? And I just can't get this. But there's something else that was fascinating as I've been continuing to read the testimony of this whistleblower from Planned Parenthood. I mentioned yesterday on the show, and if you didn't catch it, please go download the podcast, head over to relevantradio.com/trending, because she talked about how she's super pro-abortion, and she said, I even recognize that Planned Parenthood's bread and butter financially are abortions. But she was saying that this transgender testosterone so-called care, affirmative care for these kids, that it is a cash cow for Planned Parenthood. And there was a connection drawn, actually, by LifeSite News, which, by the way, they've been banned completely from YouTube. LifeSite News commented that this is actually interesting because Planned Parenthood got into the transgender testosterone cross-sex hormone game when they started losing money from the baby body part scandal a handful of years ago. So what happened? They're in trouble for getting extra money for illegally selling baby body parts and identifying and going after women for the parts of their babies. And now, because it's all about their bottom line, such as one of their high-level executives said with regard to wanting to be able to continue to do business with companies that wanted to buy fetal body parts. Now this is about the bottom line again. And what we've seen is that Cecil Richards was the person who helped get them into this. And I find it fascinating because remember Dr. Leanna Wen? She left Planned Parenthood 2 years ago. She was the new president. It was a big deal. She was all about how abortion is healthcare, contraception is healthcare. I thought she was a brilliant spokesperson. She was dangerous. They got rid of her. Why? One of the reasons Planned Parenthood got rid of their, in my opinion, for what their mission was, excellent spokesperson, was because she wasn't following along with this transgender game they were playing. They wanted her to refer to pregnant women as pregnant persons, and she refused. I don't think she was okay with what was happening behind the scenes with some of this cross-sex hormone care. I think that this didn't come out publicly because my guess is that she was not okay with it at a certain point. I'm throwing it out there. You can be pro-LGBTQ and not be a fan of giving kids cross-sex hormones. Just like Abigail Schreier, who has this book exposing a lot of this, and then this whistleblower from Planned Parenthood ended up coming out and sharing with her. But here's what this whistleblower said. She said, I am so okay with abortion, essentially. And she goes on and on about this. But she makes it clear at a certain point, she made this comment. I'm trying to find it. She makes a point. She said, I struggle with that more. That is the cross-sex hormones to teenagers. Should I struggle with that more than I did being in an operating room for like a 20-week abortion? So what this woman is saying is, I was in the room for abortions that took place at 20 weeks. She saw how large and developed those babies were. And she's even acknowledging that that was hard on her. But what she's saying is it was harder for her to give children and young adults cross-sex hormones when they really have no gender confusion at all. It's a trend. And it's not being regulated by medical professionals. That is telling, and here's why. We have hit the point where abortion for some time now has been considered a necessary evil. So a woman feels bad for the abortion, but she feels worse for giving a child testosterone, a little girl testosterone. Why? Because it goes so radically against the nature of what is real. Femininity and masculinity, male-female biological realities are true. Just like abortion being wrong is true. We've told ourselves that abortion is a necessary evil. Now is the time when people are upset and confused about cross-sex hormones for little girls that we need to speak up before people think that this is a necessary evil and something that a teenager has a right to and something that is normalized. And this is why Blue's Clues putting P for pride is problematic. Because we are going to become numb to the issue just as we have become numb to the abortion issue, and just as we have begun to justify abortion in so many instances. And that's why we continue to discuss this here on Trending, because we need to be aware of what's happening. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Join the conversation. If you have a question for my guest, Sister Tina Alfieri, it's Ash Wednesday, and this show moving forward is all about Lenten hacks. What questions do you have? She's a specialist in addictive disorders. That includes sexual addictive disorders as well. And I'm so excited to unpack what we can do this Lent to grow and overcome our bad habits. So if you have a question, give us a call at 1-888-914-9149 or head over to my Instagram story. You can ask your question now and we will take it during the show. Sister Tina, welcome to Trending.
Thank you, Timmerie. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Boy, it's already Lent, and there's so many options and ideas for what we can give up, what we can do. Let's talk from your specialty. You very commonly are exposed to addictive disorders, especially surrounding sexuality and pornography. But I mean, the top three most addictive things have to do with food, money, and sex, essentially. What are your tips for overcoming disorders related to these three things, particularly in light of Lent?
So I especially encourage if a person has no spiritual life to please find one. That's the most important thing is if you're Catholic and you've been away, please come back. We'd love to have you. Plus, it's also very strengthening. The graces that one receives from all of the sacraments helps to strengthen us in our Christian life and in our battle against evil and sin. So the first thing I strongly recommend is to have a good sacramental life in place. If it's possible, daily Mass. Many people take on daily Mass during Lent if they're not already a daily Mass goer. Frequent confession, prayer, spending designated time in prayer, especially prayer or devotions to the Blessed Mother, asking for her intercession. So the first thing I always want to recommend for Catholics especially, but for any Christian, is have your sacramental life in order. That's your basic primary concern. It's the basic primary aid to help strengthen us.
I love that. And that is the baseline. Someone was asking me a question about a different period of time that I went through last year when we were having these ups and downs with kind of what was going on with the baby, and various things were kind of hitting us from different perspectives, from a tubal pregnancy potentially to then they said we were having twins and then a blood clot and risk of miscarriage. And someone asked me, like, how did you have so much peace that entire time? Like, how were you able to kind of maintain? And my response was the Eucharist. Daily reception of the Eucharist. If we truly believe that our Lord Jesus Christ is present in the Eucharist, if he gave himself for us, and if we consume him, and we are in a state of grace and working toward a state of grace, going to confession once a month, and I can be guilty of this, I need to go to confession myself, making our way there, then we are going to be able to see growth in the spiritual life. But if we don't take these sacraments seriously, that growth doesn't occur on a spiritual level, maybe on a human level, but then it's much easier to fall back into those bad habits. So what are additional tips you have this Lent? Maybe a key one or two things to do if someone's struggling, let's say, with a pornography addiction.
So I also encourage during Lent is a 3-day fast on bread and water. This is something that I do encourage for spiritual reasons. When we fast, we need to have our spirit engaged in the fast. It's not just going without food. It's going without food with an intention and a purpose. Amen. And it's to get closer to God, to help to master the bodily appetites. And our focus needs to be on when I'm hungry, I need to remember that I'm sacrificing, and that this sacrifice is just a small, small piece of what Jesus has sacrificed for me already. Now, there's nothing magical in a 3-day bread and water fast, so it's not going to cure addictions. But what it does, I like to think of it as it's a nice little jump start or kick start. It demonstrates earnestness, a desire to get my life back in order. So it's not the end-all, be-all. It's not a cure, but it is a signal to oneself, and also a sacrifice that we offer to God, that we are serious about trying to get our lives back in order.
Amen. I think that it's hardcore, and someone's going to go, whoa, and in my mind I'm thinking, yes, let's do it, because we don't know how to fast as Catholics, and you just hit the nail on the head. It has a purpose. Those hunger pains have a purpose, not only because we're offering it at the beginning of our day, but in those moments we go, Lord, this is to unite myself to your suffering, to be reminded of the sins that I am going through. It creates what I would say a deep sense of self-awareness.
Yes.
So that brings me to another way that some people, I think, can become self-aware. What are your thoughts on picking up a journaling to help with that awareness during Lent? Maybe a little bit at the beginning and end of the day. Is this helpful for bad habits and addictive disorders?
So journaling is a good tool. Some people enjoy it. Some people despise it. You have to find what works for you. Journaling is great. I think also, along with, if you do journal, I would encourage maybe a journaling that includes an examination of conscience, a specific or particular examine where you're really trying to work on decreasing a particular sin in your life, not just a general examine, but a particular examine, which focuses on a particular vice or sin that you're really struggling with. I like to do the particular examine because it's focused like a laser beam on really trying to decrease the frequency of the falls into that sin, or at times, hopefully, you can gain some actual freedom from it. I like to use the particular examine, again, it's like focused like a laser beam. The general examine, maybe that we do before we go to our confession, where we look over the past week or the past month. A general examine is, I kind of give it akin to, it's like a shotgun. It's a wide catch. It's a wide area. But the particular examine is looking at a particular fault that we're really trying to work on eradicating, eliminating, or at least trying to decrease the frequency. So a particular examine, and to journal that, some people in the old days would actually keep a tally. They would just make a tally mark, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then cross through how many times they fell into that particular sin that they're trying to work on. And it's nice if you do that for Lent. I would hope that if you're really fasting, praying, taking care of your sacramental life, and doing a particular examine and journaling about it, I would hope that by the end of 40 days, you would see that you have fallen less into that particular sin by the end of Lent.
This is so helpful. We're going to come back with Sister Tina Alfieri here on Trending. She's a specialist in addictive disorders. Ask your questions. Give us a call, 1-888-914-9149, or ask on Instagram now. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, I really did not know where this was going a second ago. One of my producers, Lucas, asked me, okay, random question, have any of you eaten a locust? And I really thought that he was going to share that this was what he was doing this Lent, pulling a John the Baptist, going into the desert. Okay, I'm really glad he was just curious and wondering what they tasted like since John the Baptist did it, and that he was not going for a locust diet. And we proposed a bread and water 3-day fast with Sister Tina here a moment ago, and we're going to unpack more. Sister Tina Alfieri is a specialist in addictive disorders, especially sex addictions, and she's joining us to unpack how we can grow this Lent. So if you have a question, give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149, or head over now to my Instagram story at Timmerie, Timmerie, where you can ask your question there. We have them coming in very quickly. Sister Tina, one of the questions that came in for you is, what is the best thing to do exactly at the moment of temptation when you're dealing with an addictive behavior?
Oh, what a fantastic question. So we have about there's something called the 3-second rule. We have about 3 seconds to make a decision with an addictive disorder when we're faced with a triggering situation. We have about 3 seconds, so it's very, very quick. What I encourage people to do is, it's very difficult in that moment. What I encourage instead is that you learn to rehearse when you're not triggered. We call it a fire drill, just like children in school. They practice when the bell rings for a fire alarm, getting in line, going outside, single file, and gathering together. They do that when there's not a fire, so that when there is a fire, they already have rehearsed and practiced, and they know what to do. So what I encourage is, it's very difficult for people trying to overcome an addiction to say no to it in the moment. So instead, I encourage people, when you're calm, when everything is fine, take a couple of moments and imagine the most likely instances that you are faced with this particular addictive situation. Let's say if it's viewing pornography, let's imagine that you're home alone, nobody else in the house, and you have a computer that's unfiltered, no pornography blocking software on it. So let's imagine in our brain, let's rehearse, what are we going to do? Let's imagine that. An alcoholic who is abstaining from alcohol, let's suppose that one of their high-risk situations is going to a party and people are constantly pushing alcohol or offering them a drink. Let's rehearse before we go to that party. When we're calm, we can think about it. We practice our refusal skills, saying things like, no, thank you, I'm not drinking right now. So we have to practice beforehand, because when we get out there kind of like on the playing field of life, if we haven't practiced, we're going to get our hat handed to us by our addictive disorder. So there's a lot of work that goes into staying clean and sober. There's a lot of practicing. There's a lot of imagining. Refusal skills are number one. In the moment, it's going to be very difficult. My advice or suggestion is, if you do find yourself in the moment, is to do something physical. The first thing I highly recommend usually is change your environment and do something physical. So if you're tempted at the computer with porn, close down the computer, go wash some dishes, go rake some leaves, go start a load of laundry, run the vacuum cleaner. If you've got pets, take the pet for a walk, or feed the fish, clean out your cat's litter box. Do something physical that gets you out of that situation.
This is fantastic. Sister.
Yeah, so you've got to do something physical to get out of there. And that doesn't necessarily mean going outside. I know that we're in the midst of really cold weather right now, but what it does mean is actually not just sitting there and hoping, gee, I hope this doesn't, continue to nag me like it is. I don't want to look at porn. It's like, no, you have to get up and you go do something. You've only got 3 seconds to make that decision. So you've got to just jump up and go do something else.
This role play, imagining, as you said, when things are calm, when you're not tempted, what it's like going through it, practicing saying no, how to cope and manage in the situation, changing the environment, doing something physical. This is so helpful, because I find one of the things that happens, especially as people progress in the spiritual life, they're doing less giving up of things and trying to do something, or they're trying to work in a particular bad habit. And maybe it's a bad habit you have within the context of your home and your marriage or your children, and how you respond and react to them. And it's one thing to say, I want to be more patient, I want to have more self-control, to be more prudent, but you just hit the nail on the head for how we actually make progress in those interpersonal dynamics in the home. So can you give some examples of how we can practice that? Say if you have a really bad habit of kind of that fight or flight hormone kicking in within certain contexts in the home, and you just react to situations. You try to take control of the situation, you respond in a particular way. How can we work this Lent on fixing that?
Right. So I strongly suggest, again, is doing a little imagining. In most marriages and most significant relationships, there are issues that just keep coming up over and over and over again. In marriage and family therapy, sometimes we say that people have been fighting about the same argument or arguing the same issue for the past 20 years in their marriage, and it's never resolved. So if there's a particular issue that is always coming up, let's say you and your spouse have different opinions about disciplining the children, if one of you is more lenient and the other one is more of a disciplinarian, and this is causing friction between you two, and it's been causing friction for the past 10 years with all of the children in your home, then I strongly suggest, again, that practicing how am I going to respond to my mate, not if this issue comes up, but when it does come up. Because if it's an unresolved, ongoing issue like that, it's going to be repeated. The issue is going to keep popping up. So we have to really practice envisioning or imagining how we're going to respond in the situation. Now, this is not any different than what sports psychologists do with top performing athletes. They encourage the athletes to relax before a big match or a big game and to envision or imagine themselves being successful, getting the ball across the line, making that basket, or getting that tennis serve right into the box and being successful every single time. Again, there's not anything magical about this, but it's mental rehearsing. And again, it's like a fire drill. We do this when there's not a fire so that when we are under stress, this becomes more of an automatic response.
So what's really important, if you're just joining us, it's Ash Wednesday. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Sister Tina Alfieri here on Trending. She's a specialist in addictive disorders, and we're talking about what we can do this Lent to overcome bad habits. So one of the things that's standing out to me about what you said is taking the time to envision that, create the role play, be in the situation, create the environment of how to overcome this. But one thing I think, and I'm losing my train of thought here for a second, but one thing that I think often happens is we're so used to rushing through the day, rushing through what we're doing. We're not used to slowing down. And so even just taking that pause is a lot of work. But what I was thinking of, and it just came back to me, is our brain is like a muscle. Just like we work on exercising our biceps, our hamstrings, getting those glutes nice and strong or big, whatever you're looking for, the brain is a muscle too. And that muscle memory of the brain is really what you're talking about. But for some reason, sister, we don't think of our brain as needing to have repetitive actions in order to overcome a bad habit, because that's the way our brain's used to functioning.
Mm-hmm. And, think about driving a car, Timmerie. I think most of us have had the experience where we, are driving home maybe, and we're preoccupied with many thoughts in our head. What happened at work? What am I going to cook for dinner? Maybe I've got a friend that's sick and I'm thinking about them. And all of a sudden, without us realizing that, my car is in the driveway. I've just driven 20 miles and I wasn't even really aware of it. Right? So I think we've all had that experience. The driving has become automatic. And how did that happen? Well, for most of us who are in our 30s, 40s, or 50s, we've been driving for a very, very, very long time. The body kind of knows what to do. So we can do that with the brain as well. If we practice and practice and practice this envisioning or imagining ourselves in these situations and having a proper response that we want to give, maybe instead of yelling at my spouse, then I can have a proper response of trying to listen to my spouse and have a discussion instead of an argument. I can help to form myself into having that be the response instead of just reacting in a negative manner. Again, this takes time. It's not an end-all, be-all, cure-all, but it is something that repetition, as you described very aptly, muscle memory. This is why athletes practice drills. It's because it becomes second nature. It's not only just for muscles, it is for our brain and how we react. The word habit comes from the Latin word habitus, which means where you live. Now, we need to think about, where do we want to live in relationship to our God, in relationship to our family, our friends, those who are important to us and around us? Do I want to live in a negative space, or do I want to live in a space that's positive, Christ-like, and godly? Then I need to help form this habit in myself. So yes, bad habits like addictions don't develop overnight. They develop over time. Good habits, positive habits, also don't develop overnight. They develop over time with practice.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I love that. And coming back to that 3 seconds of reaction time, we have to remember, we talk a lot about in certain circumstances, difficult situations, ask the Holy Spirit to be there with you. And Karen, my producer, is just saying, invite the Holy Spirit in that moment. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's your 3 seconds of a deep breath, come Holy Spirit, and then working through that. And, if we really do practice working on this muscle memory, things will change. And I think that's the other part. If we don't have those 3 theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, we're going to have a hard time overcoming our bad habits. And so we have to pray for that virtue of hope, that in Christ we can grow through his intercession, through the sacraments, and through real human practice that we're talking about right now to overcome that bad habit that you are struggling with, that you've been wanting to kick for such a long time. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. There are 2 more questions I really want to make sure that we touch on together, Sister Tina. One of them, real quick here, is tips for battling scrupulosity. If you could briefly explain what it is for those who aren't really sure, because I think sometimes people hear about scrupulosity and they go, oh, I actually struggle with that and I had no idea. So what are some tips for overcoming it?
Okay, great. So scrupulosity, I kind of refer to it as religious anxiety. Scrupulosity means doubting oneself, doubting one's nature as far as if they are in a state of grace or not, doubting what the priest told me for advice in confession. It's always a doubt. Did the priest really understand my confession is a real common one. Did the priest really give me good advice? Maybe I need to go to another priest and then another priest, kind of like priest shopping in the confessional. Maybe I didn't pray my rosary well enough. Maybe I should pray it again with more intention. So it's just a lot of anxiety about one's religious state or things of like a religious nature. It can be very maddening. It's very detrimental to growing in the spiritual life because scrupulosity, this anxiety, really sows doubt and distrust in the believer. And that can take them down some really dark roads, doubting God, doubting the faith, trying to fall, or sometimes falling into other new age type practices because they heard something else, quote, really works. So scrupulosity is very serious. The way to battle scrupulosity, number 1, you get a good confessor. You go to the same confessor. That's what a confessor is. It's the same priest that you confess to every single time. Why do we go to a confessor if we're scrupulous? Because the confessor will get to know us. That is the main reason that we have a confessor. We don't priest shop or priest hop or confessional hop. We make an appointment. We go to the same priest every single time. If we are aware that we are scrupulous, we tell the priest that when we meet with him. Father, before I give my confession, I just want to let you know I have tendencies of scrupulosity. Give the priest a heads up. Or if you're not aware of it, if you are meeting with the same priest over and over and over again, I will let you know the priest will advise you if he thinks that you're being scrupulous. So number 1 is to get a confessor, the same priest at the same all the time. And if you have to make an appointment to do that, I strongly encourage make an appointment. Don't just wander into Saturday confession and take whoever's there. Get a good confessor. And then number 2 would be get into good spiritual direction. Spiritual direction is separate from confession. Spiritual direction is really where you can talk about maybe your doubts, your fears, your concerns. Why is it you think God isn't listening to you? Why is it you think your rosaries are not good enough, etc., etc.? So spiritual direction combined with a confessor will really help with scrupulosity.
Sister Tina Alfieri is here, an addictive specialist therapist, sister, a hermit. She's incredible. We'll bring her back again during Lent, so send us your questions. We'll be back in just a minute, or I'll be back to discuss more on Lenten Hacks, the questions you've asked. But you can find some of the work of Sister Tina Alfieri. She works with Bloom for Catholic Women, addressing the issue of pornography for women. So check out bloomforcatholicwomen.com. I'll be right back with some Lenten hacks for this Lent.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Okay, ready for a fast one on as much as we can cover. Questions about Lent and Lenten hacks. There's so many questions you sent my way, and I wanted to kick it off by answering this question from Instagram, tips for battling sloth. Well, there was a call yesterday that came in that didn't make it on air, but it was Esther from Menifee, California. She said, I'm 78 years old, and my mother taught us to do more rather than give up. And I think that that's a really good answer to the topic of slothfulness. And this is wisdom from someone who is approaching 80 years old. She was taught from a young age, do more. Don't give up. We live in a culture that just wants to say, well, I already screwed it up, so whatever. I've already wrecked my life, let's say spiritually. I've angered God, so why even practice my faith? I'm halfway through Lent and I failed at what I planned, so I'm just not going to do anything. I've had this sexual past and I feel like I'm damaged goods, so I'm just going to keep living as I am, even though that's not what I want. I've maybe been looking at porn and I feel like I'm just not savable, that this can't change because it's such an addiction. That's not true. The answer is don't give up. Don't become slothful and lazy. Whether it's acedia, which is spiritual slothfulness, laziness in your prayer life, or just slothfulness, you can't get up off the couch and do things, whether it's exercise, your job, whatever it might be. And remember, with regard to slothfulness as well, sometimes the problem is that we aren't giving ourselves enough motivation. Maybe in the age of COVID, you're not having enough human interaction with other people as everyone's working from home. I think that's a really important that, are you paying attention to your spiritual life, your physical health, food and exercise, and are you paying attention to the social environment you're in that helps to inspire you to do more and come out of that slothfulness? Question also came in, favorite prayer app. I am not a pray on my phone type of person. I like hard copies of books and hard copies of prayers. However, I have in the past liked the Divine Office app. I'm not sure if that's still around. I know there's a copyright issue, but I like praying the Liturgy of the Hours. But some of the top favorite prayer apps I know are Laudato Si and I Pieta. So those are two really great ones that I know a lot of people love. My husband loves them. Great options for those if you're looking around. One question, so general, make this my best Lent ever. Okay, thank you for the question or the demand on Instagram. So let's take more of these questions. How do you help a teen think about and commit to Lent? This is a great question. Give them the opportunity to challenge them to grow and to grow with Christ. And so, I think that exposing them to their faith more, helping to create the atmosphere of Lent, even the physical and emotional atmosphere, is important. Not that we rely on that, but this is why we had Kendra Tierney with us last Monday here on Trending. We're going to post a link to that podcast now on social media, because we talked about how to create that environment for Lent, how to practice the feast days to celebrate a little bit in the middle of Lent, for example, St. Joseph's feast day, but how to, as a family, say, okay, this is a challenge. We're all going to give up sugar in our home. We're all going to give up that junk food. There are particular prayers we're going to do together. Make it communal. Make it a part of your life. But it's also helpful that if you expect your kids to observe the solemnness of Lent, that you're also expecting yourself to celebrate with them the great feast days and saints' days throughout the year. And I'm not just talking Christmas and Easter. Those are the two greatest ones. But also to celebrate the feast days that matter most. Maybe a confirmation saint. Maybe it's a namesake. Maybe it's someone you have a devotion to. Or maybe it's just the Marian feast days that we have peppered in there all year long. Okay, fasting tips. I love this question, and we might talk about this more because I love talking to my husband about fasting, perhaps on Friday when he's on the show with me. But fasting tips, here's number one. Really, I live by the ketogenic diet. Keto, higher fats really do help you when it comes to fasting. Really do help. The healthy fats, the avocado oil, the coconut oil, all of the olive oils. These are all great things. Like, if you're going to fast, you need to prepare for your fast by eating the right foods and being hydrated before. Otherwise, it can be really difficult when it comes time to fast and you haven't been eating well. Well, you're going to be craving sugar if your body hasn't had what it needs. Another question that came in, someone, Walpy on Facebook commented, I'm thinking about becoming Catholic. Why do you do the things that you do during Lent? Well, we're imitating Christ who went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and he prayed and fasted. We're also challenged to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And so we are imitating Christ. We're also, similarly, John the Baptist went into the desert to fast and pray. And so we're doing something that Christ and the great saints and prophets before us have done. And there's a significance to those 40 days, just as there was a significance to the 40 years wandering in the desert of the ancient Israelites when they were brought out of Egypt. This is a period where we're called to conversion and we're challenged to participate in our salvation. Because here's the deal. We're called to imitate Christ because we are baptized. We become little Christ. Now, by Christ, through our baptism, we are redeemed. The human race is redeemed. The gates of heaven are opened back up to us. However, you and I still are working out our salvation with Christ. And Lent is one of those opportunities for us to grow. To detach from those things we need to detach from so that we can attach properly to Christ. Another question that came up is, how can I grow in holiness while struggling with being in the world and at times of the world? I think that this is where we have to ask ourselves, what specific things am I attached to? What nervous habits do I have, like running to my phone, checking social media? Where do I spend the most time or waste the most time? These are all really great questions to ask ourselves to understand what we need to detach from. There's a question that came up about breastfeeding and fasting. I don't have a ton of time, so I'll go ahead and take that question on Friday. So stay tuned for more Lenten hacks. If you have something that you're working on and would like ideas for working on it, let me know. Question came up about ashes are being sprinkled on heads this year instead of on the forehead. Now, I got Q-tipped on my forehead. I don't know about you, but the ashes sprinkled on the head is something that we've seen in Italy and other places, and it actually follows the biblical roots of the Old Testament with regard to the practice of fasting, where they would actually put on sackcloth and sprinkle ashes on their head when they fasted. And so this is biblical. It comes from places such as Nehemiah 9 in the Bible. And so now with ashes, we have had them marked on our forehead because we look at Ash Wednesday and Lent as partially a communal penitential act, specifically that of participating in the liturgy together, of receiving those ashes. So lots more in terms of Lenten hacks coming your way Friday, but this has been a great episode. Stacy Trasenkos will be with you tomorrow for the marriage hour, but I'll be back with my husband Gabriel on Friday.